Good morning, everybody. Welcome back after the weekend. So by now, of course, we all know our Deputy Minister of Forestry, Jamie Chippett, who's here with us today, Minister of Justice and Public Safety. Minister Haggie is again here virtually. And joining us this morning is Minister of Seniors, Minister Jamie Korab. I'll lead this morning first to talk about the most recent update on the wildfire situation here in the province. This morning, we have low ceilings, which are impacting the deployment of aerial assets. But once the fog burns off, it looks like a good day for suppression efforts. In the forecast for all three fires is high teen temperatures and, of course, our favorite weather condition now, rain. I can say that after this weekend, we're very hopeful that we've turned the corner on these three fires. But it is important to note that all three are still classified as being out of control. And we don't need the air assets that we did last week on the Paddy's Pond fire. So, of course, that will certainly help deploy the assets as to Martin Lake and to Kingston to fight those fires. So it was a good news story over the course of this weekend, although I do understand, of course, that individuals in the CBN area are having a difficult time as this is now dragging on into week 3. And I'll have more to say about those individuals, as will Minister Korab. As for the Kingston fire itself, there's been minimal growth. We're at 9,850 hectares. Crews at this wildfire did report a good weekend, and progress was made through both aerial and ground suppression efforts. Unfortunately, the light winds did create very, very smoky conditions, but the water bombers were still able to action the western edge of the wildfire. We also had light capacity helicopters and Ontario ground crews working the southern area, including a flare-up which occurred on Pickle Ridge. Towards the northern edge of the fire, we had 4 heavy-capacity helicopters working on the fire edge, one S-61, a Super Puma, and the 2 Blackhawks. Ground crews and local fire departments continue to work on structural protection and establishing additional containment lines and barriers, and the Armed Forces completed additional hotspot scanning and will continue with this work today. Our incident management team will repeat yesterday's suppression efforts with air and ground crews action to priority areas. As I said, fog and low ceilings are impacting the deployed air assets this morning. However, we do have confirmation that the Raptor has left Gander this morning. It will come to St. John's for a briefing and then move towards CBN. So it is a good sign that weather seems to be improving so we can get the air assets out to that fire. When it is safe to do so, we'll have our 3 Newfoundland and Labrador water bombers and 3 Ontario water bombers working throughout the day. They'll be staggered on the south edge towards Perry's Cove. The 4 heavy helicopters will work the north flank. The ground crews on the northern edge and communities include 127 volunteer firefighters, 40 from Newfoundland and Labrador and Ontario. The ground crew in and around Adams Cove area is 20 military. There's no growth on the Paddy's Pond fire, and fire activity remains low. The fire is about 318 hectares. Fuel break construction and ground suppression efforts over the weekend helped to contain this wildfire, with boundaries continuing to hold. The ground crews continue to work along with the helicopter bucketing as needed, and this includes St. John's Regional Fire Department, 20 military, and 20 fighters from BC. The fire is almost completely surrounded by hoses now, and all fire break work has been completed. There's limited fire activity at Martin Lake right now and no growth. It is about 1,770 hectares. The weather conditions in the area yesterday allowed 4 water bombers, a bird dog, and bucketing helicopters to continue suppression. Ground crews continued their work on structure protection and suppression along the southwest boundary. Route 360 is open today. However, access to cabin areas in Rushy Pond Road, Martin Lake Road, and Miguel's Lake Road remain closed. I think the good news is we can anticipate that Route 360 now is opened, and we don't anticipate any closures as a result of Martin Lake. But, of course, we will continue to keep an eye on it because Martin Lake wildfire does still remain active, of course. Anyone traveling in the area is reminded to be aware of crews and that smoky conditions can still be expected. And they're also reminded that there can be an increase in fire behavior. This morning, tankers were unable to be deployed because of fog and low ceiling, but as I've said, it looks like that weather is starting to turn in our favor, so hopefully the assets can get to Martin Lake soon. Once the ceiling allows, the ground crews are safely in position. The planned assets for today would be our 4 Quebec water bombers and a bird dog, and ground crew includes 20 from BC and 30 from our province. So I want to just take a couple of minutes to thank again the incredible crews who spent this weekend fighting these fires and keeping us and our communities safe. I think the province had a collective sigh of relief on Friday when the skies opened up. I certainly got a lot of texts from friends, pictures. People literally were dancing in the rain. One of my friends texted me, he was at a restaurant and said that everybody in the restaurant cheered when they saw the rain outside. So my two kids came home soaking wet. They were out dancing in the rain and gave me big hugs. And even they knew how important it was to get that little bit of rain over the weekend. And I just, as a province, we all just sort of felt that happiness and that sense of relief. It was a pretty special moment over the last 2 weeks of a lot of difficult moments. Surprising, of course, that Newfoundlanders and Labradorians are cheering for cold and wet conditions, but that's certainly where we are right now. And it was a nice little moment in the grand scheme of things over the past 2 weeks. Of course, it's good to hear that growth has slowed and that the teams continue to be cautiously optimistic about this week ahead. But as I said, we aren't in the clear yet. We have extended the off-road vehicle restrictions until 11:59 p.m. on Wednesday. So this means you can't ride your off-road vehicles in areas where the fire index is high, very high or extreme. But of course, it does mean you can ride your off-road vehicles in other parts of the province where the index is not in that condition. The new higher fines remain in place for anyone breaching the regulations and starting fires. I was in Carbonera yesterday, where I personally experienced the incredible resilience of people in Conception Bay North. And most importantly, of course, the dedication of the first responders, the volunteers, and all the government officials on the ground. I met with Roger Gillingham, who's the chief of the North Shore Fire Department, and we went through the work that the volunteer firefighters are doing. We were in a room, we were on a whiteboard, they listed all the volunteer firefighters who were in that part of the province from across the province. And you name it, it was literally from coast to coast to coast. People have come to that part of the province to help fight these fires. One guy came back into the building with just his face covered in soot or ash in his hands, but you could just see he'd been there since 7 in the morning, and that was close to the end of the day. So he was just such an example of all the work that these individuals are putting themselves through. And again, as I said, for 2 weeks, we can't thank them enough. As for the individuals that I spoke with at Carbonera Academy, there's certainly a sense of fatigue and a tremendous sense of sadness. Some family members that I talked to, of course, they're upset. They've lost their homes. One lady I talked to lost her home, and her 3 sons lost their homes. This was in Kingston. I remember what she said to me, that Kingston is not just a place to live. Like, Kingston is a way of life, is how she communicated to me. There's no words for me to comfort her, just to tell her that the province will be there to rebuild and work with them on what these communities look like in the future. Minister Cora will have more to say on that. But we're not even there yet. We do need to make sure that everyone can return to their communities when it's safe, and we're not quite there yet. One thing I did hear yesterday was individuals, having been gone for 2 weeks, are getting more anxious as the days go by to hear whether their structures, whether their homes are still standing or not. So I want to assure everybody that there is a process underway in order to share the most updated information that we can gather regarding structure loss and damage in these communities. But of course, it does take some time. The fire is still active and burning out of control, and firefighters are doing everything they can to control the firefighter. But it does remain a very serious situation, which, as we know, can change day by day and hour by hour. And safety has to remain paramount for everybody on the front lines. So some residents of the town of Small Point, Broad Cove, Blackhead, Adams Cove, and the community of Kingston have been notified that they've lost their homes. And these notifications will continue for neighboring communities over the next couple of days, with Western Bay and Ocrapick Cove notifications starting today. Many of the communities affected are unincorporated, which means they have no town councils, and it does make the process a little bit more time-consuming and difficult. We've started conducting preliminary assessment planning and the collection of resident information in these areas, all of which we have to verify before we communicate any lost structures to these individuals. We will be in direct contact with those who have unfortunately lost their homes, and we are moving as fast as we can. It will take some time to understand the scope of what is needed, given that it is still a very active emergency situation. But as I have said, these fires will come to an end, and we will be there for you for the recovery and response process. We've established a cabinet committee of ministers to lead the response and recovery of Conception Bay North. They will meet with local leaders and community members, with the federal government, with the provincial government, and we will identify ways to assist people during this difficult time. This multi-pronged approach will be chaired by Minister Korab, who is responsible for housing and has very close ties to this region. The committee will consist of the ministers from education, health, industry, energy and technology, municipal affairs and community engagement, justice and public safety, transportation and infrastructure, and they will begin working on these issues immediately. We will face a serious challenge in this part of the province, and as a community and as a region. We must remain focused on the present emergency situation and fires that are still burning, but we will have to, and we will immediately turn our attention to medium and longer term impacts of these fires. And just like the firefighters in the air and on the ground, Newfoundland and Labrador will meet this challenge head on. I did hear the struggles and the pain in people's voices yesterday. As I said, it's difficult to have those conversations when you can't even tell people what they've lost yet. So we do have to get to that part of the process where those assessments are done, where individuals' homes can be determined if they've been lost, if they've been damaged, and if they're damaged, are they even safe to return to? And other things like working with Newfoundland Power and NL Hydro to return any damaged hydro assets to that region. Things like schools have been lost, potentially community centers, town council halls, all these sorts of things we need to do an assessment of before we determine exactly what it's going to look like in terms of rebuilding these damaged communities. But the purpose of this community, and I'll let Minister Korab provide some more details, is to listen to individuals in this part of the province to hear what they need and what they want these communities to look like when we rebuild, because their input is important. As I heard from so many of them yesterday, these people have been here for generations, people talking about their great-grandfathers having built their homes and been passed down from family to family over the course of a long, long time. So it is important for us to take that time and take those steps to work with them, but I just would ask for them to remain a little bit more patient as we get these fires out before we can return and assess and determine what the damage are to these communities. So with that, I'll hand it over to Minister Korab.
Thank you, Premier. Like everyone else in the province, I've watched daily briefings to hear the latest on the wildfire response. I could not be more impressed with the hard work of our many agencies, departments, firefighters, and volunteers who work collectively to support the residents and communities in Conception Bay North. While I live and represent constituents in St. John's, I was born and raised in Harbour Grace, and I lived in Carbonear as a child. I have family from Carbonear to South River, and just about every community in CBN in between. I went to school in the region, I rode in the Lower Island Cove Regatta, and I worked summers at a farm in Redhead Cove as a teenager. I spent more days than I can count on the beaches of Northern Bay Sands and Salmon Cove Sands. Conception Bay North will always be my home, and it's a tragedy for me that hits really close to home, as it does the families that are impacted. I visited the Evacuation Centre in Victoria and in Carbonear and spoke with residents who are full of fear and uncertainty. I will be heading out to Carbonear again today to chat with residents. As the Premier said, we want to hear directly from you on what your communities will look like. People all over the province have pledged their support, as we always do, and I'm pleased that Premier Hogan has called on me to head up this committee, as I feel it's a way for me to help the community that I'm from. As the Premier has alluded to, this will be a multi-pronged approach throughout our government, from water treatment to schools to roads and infrastructure and much more. The fires are still burning, but we're ready to turn our heads towards what comes next once these fires are out and how these communities will look. We will work together as a cabinet and as a government in these recovery efforts. This committee will be supported by dedicated teams of public service employees. To my friends in Conception Bay North, you have a commitment from our government and our cabinet to do what is needed to get this region up and running. We will recover, we will rebound, just like Newfoundlanders and Labradorians always do. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister Korab. Minister Haggie.
Thank you very much, Premier. I just want to take a moment to share some of the numbers coming out of the reception centres, and I'd like again to say thank you to the Salvation Army and the Red Cross. Currently, we have 2,943 households registered with the Red Cross having been evacuated. And that accounts for a total of 6,094 individuals. We announced some financial support, and currently 1,118 payments have been made since that announcement on August the 11th. And none of this would have been possible without the help of the people locally and the people from away. And the Premier's referenced volunteer firefighters. I have at least 2 crews from my own district who've gone out there, just like other districts have as well. So again, thank you very much to them. We are still on alert, however, and we're not quite out of the woods yet. Things are optimistic, and the Premier has explained that. We had 2 more evacuation alerts issued over the weekend, Job's Cove and Freshwater. You need to take steps to look after your own safety. That's why we're doing these things, these alerts and these orders. That preparation is basically 72 hours of what you consider essential. And I would remind people that not to forget medication particularly. It's a warning, an evacuation alert, to be ready on a moment's notice. Please listen. You may not have a lot of time. Some people had an hour to get out of their communities when the alert was changed to an order, but that's not always a given. On the financial support issue, going back to Badger and Musgrave Harbour, we want them to register too. There was a Red Cross office in Musgrave Harbour. They extended their operation for a day, but now for those residents, the options really are either phone line, 1-800-863-6582, or the internet, www.redcross.ca/2025 Newfoundland wildfires. Badger residents still have an opportunity to register in person again today, and there's a reception area in Carbonear that everybody knows about as well. There are volunteers there who can help you with that process. Again, please stick with government channels, the yellow bar on the top of the Government of NL website. There's still a lot of rubbish out on the internet, and there seems to be a little factory producing it. I would urge you to pay attention to the verified information that we provide. And I acknowledge what the Premier says, that there's a lot of unofficial information out there which may turn out to be accurate and may not. All we can do as government responsibly is to provide you with information we know and trust. And in turn, I would recommend that you know that our information is known and trusted. With that, Premier, again, be kind and stay safe. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. I just want to make 2 quick points. When we talk about the length of these fires and how long it will be until it's out, today is a good chance we can declare that the Musgrave Harbour fire is out. So you think about, that wasn't yesterday. I mean, we're talking weeks ago that this fire had started, and we're getting to the point today where we can declare that one out. So that's just gives you a little bit of idea about how long these things can continue to burn. People had returned to the community, but this is how long it takes for a fire of that size, which is smaller than the Kingston fire, of course, to get to that point where we can declare it out. And again, we continue to talk about the volunteers and the good people of Newfoundland and Labrador. I just wanted to give a shout out to the 4 young kids I met on Friday who had sold lemonade and donated $174 to the Salvation Army. And they couldn't be more humble about it. They didn't even ask any questions. They showed up with their toonies and loonies and their $5 bills and gave it to the Salvation Army. I'm sure their parents and grandparents who were there were incredibly proud, and that was a nice special moment as well. So despite all the difficult times, still lots of reasons in this province to smile. So thanks to those 4 little kids. Any questions?
Have we lost any air or ground assets to other fires across the country?
None of our assets. All of our assets are still here, the Newfoundland and Labrador assets. Yep, so I think there have been a couple from New Brunswick that have been returned.
Is there an updated tally on the number of structures that have been lost, homes that have been lost in CBN?
So we're getting closer to more specifics on that. We had reported, of course, there were about approximately 100. I think we can confirm now that there is 98 metered structures that have been lost, so we've been able to do that analysis. So that doesn't necessarily mean homes. That means structures, obviously, that have meters for power. And as we continue the work over the next couple of days, that number, of course, will get, unfortunately, will go up. But we are getting more specific numbers right now.
And just a clarification, Mr. Haggie, you said that 6,000 people have registered as, or individuals have registered as being evacuated. Was my understanding that we were talking about 3,000 evacuees, so can you just clarify the numbers there? I'm not sure I understand.
Yeah, the payment system works on the basis of households, and we have 2,943 households, and that includes a total then of 6,094 individuals, because obviously there are more than one individual living in a lot of households. So the count as of this morning is 6,094 individuals.
And all of whom would come from CBN, or is there also?
Yeah, I think we can get those numbers because you're
Yeah.
right. It was about 3,000 a week ago, but of course there'd been further evacuations as a result of the Paddy's Pond fire. So we can get those numbers broken out for you exactly where his 6,000 number is coming from. But yeah.
That is a cumulative number, Premier. We will need to break it down by location.
You mentioned how difficult it is in the unincorporated areas to piece together the information. What information do you look at? Are you looking at, information from Newfoundland Power? Are you working with locals who have local knowledge? How exactly do you piece that together?
So that work is being led by Justice and Public Safety, Fire and Emergency Services, but it's a combination of getting people into the community to do drive-arounds, if you will, to try to put things together. And then the Newfoundland Power piece of it is to try to verify addresses and contact information for those people.
If I may, Premier, this is the important piece about registering. If you tell us that you've been evacuated and give us a cell number, because cell numbers can't be found terribly easily, we know if you come from an incorporated area or a town or an unincorporated area. And that solves a lot of the difficulties initially. The rest is kind of verification as to exact locations and those kind of things. So please register.
Any word on increasing the compensation?
For
Those have been evacuated. It's 500 now.
no, we haven't heard any pushback on that amount. I think people, as we said from day one, they always have a place to go. We'll make sure that they'll always have meals throughout the day. And this is really for incidentals in the event, of course. It did cost them gas to get to where they had to go. They obviously left things in their homes that they may have forgotten or that they need. So we're comfortable with that number right now.
I was in Coverdale over the weekend as well, talking to a lot of people who are, like you say, frustrated with the amount of information they have about their specific home. And one man said to me, if the Premier can go up in a helicopter, why can't we send a photographer or a videographer so I can see with my own eyes or through a camera what's going on the ground? A lot of frustration from people. How do you respond to that?
So I went up in a helicopter again yesterday, and you couldn't see a thing. It was so smoky. We couldn't see a thing. So we weren't able to even try to look around and see what happened over the course of the weekend with the fire. And then when it is clear, when we were coming back, it did clear up a little bit. And even just from being in Adams Cove from the May fire, structures are like they're gone. It's not like a home fire where sort of the walls are still standing and you could say, yeah, that was my house. So you would need that local knowledge. And I don't even know if that would work from a helicopter to see if what houses are gone, because there's literally nothing left. They are burned to the ground and to ash. Even the brick chimneys are gone. So it's next to impossible to do that assessment from the air.
Our CMP investigating another suspicious fire in Twilling Gate. It's quite troubling at this point. How can we put an end to this?
I think we continue to look at what we can do as a government. Increasing fines was certainly one thing. The RCMP and the RNC are doing obviously incredible work. We encourage individuals to report anything that they have. We've been saying that for 2 weeks. The RCMP was here twice. The RNC was here once. They can't investigate without information, and it's important. I think what they communicated was that every little piece of information helps. You might not think that is going to solve the situation or solve the uncertainty about how or who started a fire, but encourage Newfoundlanders and Labradorians, if they have any bit of information, to report it to the RCMP and the RNC. The RNC worked very quickly last week to find the individual in charge, that person who had started allegedly started 3 fires here in St. John's. And I'm sure people came forward with information that was helpful in that situation. So, we'll continue to look at what we can do as a government, and I encourage Newfoundlanders and Labradorians to recognize that they have a role to play.
Do you have an updated number on the cost of other assets from each province?
Nothing updated from what we gave last week.
Realistically, in terms of for a fire of this scale, in the Kingston fire, how long, I mean, you mentioned how long it takes for a fire to be out, but for a fire to be contained when it's almost 100 square kilometers, I'm looking at Jamie because I'm hoping maybe you'll have some details. How long, like, what should people be expecting, for in terms of getting us to that point?
Yeah, I will let Jamie answer, but, we're almost at the point where Paddy's Pond can be, I guess, defined as contained, but not out. So what are we looking at now? About a week for that one? And then I guess Jamie can comment on Kingston, which is another beast altogether.
Yeah, I mean, generally when the status would change to being held, which is the next, the stage prior to anything like it being under control, is when we surrounded with hoses. So Paddy's Pond, as the Premier said, is 300 and I think 18 hectares right now. So pretty, relatively speaking, pretty easy to get around that one. You can imagine that we still have aerial suppression working some edges of the fire like we did yesterday and the day before significantly. Like I think on 2 days ago we had 6 water bombers on the southern edge of the North Shore fire. So it'll be weeks before we're at the place of having a discussion on that one being contained, I suspect. But that doesn't mean that, we're not moving towards more safer conditions where people can start to evaluate what's going on in the communities and plan next steps.
So just taking that a step further, if you need a fire to be contained before people can go back to their homes, are we talking weeks of evacuation?
I don't think that's, so just to clarify, Paddy's Pond is not contained yet, but obviously our experts were fine with allowing people to go back to their homes. So I wouldn't equate the two things as equal.
Except Paddy's Pond, it didn't burn any homes. It wasn't in a residential area.
Right.
So that is another thing that needs to be looked at. So
Okay.
I guess to your question, it could still be out of control and there could be no evacuations. But even if it might be safe to return to a community in terms of individuals being there, it doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be safe for everybody to return to their homes. It's obviously when structures are lost, that'll be very clear, but it will not be clear that structures are safe. We don't know what sort of damage, smoke, or heat could have had on the structures. And there will be other things that need to be looked at. Make sure power is hooked up, make sure anyone that is on a well, that water is safe to drink and to use. So there are still steps to take other than just looking at where the fires are and the fire activity.
You mentioned questions and concerns that you've gotten from residents in CBN. One of the biggest questions and concerns that I've heard is about the early response to the fire in Kingston on August 3rd. Just for the sake of clarity, I guess, for the residents out there, can you say how long it took to get the first water bomber on that fire?
I don't have that specific information, but one of the things I would note is that fire, there not being other fires on the go at the same time. So you obviously need to allow for assets to be ready to fly and to get briefed on a fire after the helicopter does its initial flyover and so on. The plan the plan of attack, we'll say. So I don't have the specific number, but obviously that fire started late in the day when conditions were very active, and there's always a period of time to have assets ready to fly.
I talked to a couple of people yesterday too who, terribly sad story, they had been in BC and lost their homes and moved here and lost their homes. But for what it's worth, they did say that they felt that the response to this fire in terms of air assets getting in the air as soon as possible, they thought was great.
What exactly is the procedure for getting a water bomber in place? You mentioned a helicopter has to surveil first to get a briefing plan or something like that?
So it depends on the fire, really. Like normally, from a forestry perspective, our ground crews would be notified. Often that call comes to an individual forestry depot. Ground crews would normally go and assess, and then they would request an air asset. In the case of a small fire, that might just be a bucketing helicopter. If by the time they get there, fire has kind of taken root, then they would likely be radioing back to ask for a tanker. If the fire's already gotten to a large size, then you would be planning for multiple assets, and once that information came back to our incident commander or to the forestry individual forestry depot, then they would plan how those assets would be deployed.
In the case of Small Point, I'm going to butcher the full municipality name, but you know what I'm talking about. In that case where there were homes that were destroyed, people were informed by their town councillor. There are a number of incorporated areas, right? How are people going to get that information? Is it a call coming from someone in government? Is it how can you talk about the mechanism, I guess, of informing people that their homes have been lost?
Yeah, so it will be communicated through government, and we'll make sure as well that mental health supports are there at the time. There is a process in terms of how that should be delivered in the most compassionate way possible.
Sorry, just one more question on my line of questioning earlier. Has there been any sort of post-mortem yet looking at that early response and how that went?
Sorry, what do you mean?
Have you guys assessed those first early hours of the fire and I guess, you know, have you looked at whether there was a satisfactory response? That's the question that I'm getting from residents out there.
Yep.
Was the response from the province satisfactory?
No, we haven't looked at that. We're still continuing to make sure that we put this fire out, but as with any situation like this, we'll always look back and see where we can learn lessons and where things can be better, and where potentially, you know, if there's budget decisions that need to be made in terms of more funding or assets or anything like that, that'll all be part of the process once we get through this.
One more question. Minister Haggie, you mentioned the disinformation that's out there and the incorrect information. A question that I think we've all asked in our newsrooms, has there been any conversation about speaking with the federal government, maybe in hopes of getting us back on social media? I mean, we can't post. We can't put that information out there.
I haven't. Yeah, go ahead, Minister.
And no, the short answer about that is no, because that was made for other reasons. I'm happy to take that back. And certainly I have a receptive ear with the Federal Minister of Emergency Preparedness, and she presumably would take that through channels. I don't have an issue with recognized media outlets posting on social media. I think the other stuff that goes around that argument was more particular to other jurisdictions than Canada.
Great. Thank you, everybody, and stay safe.